Thank you for coming, everyone. It's great to see you here, and this is in this special place. I've been very lucky since this book came out a couple of weeks ago, and I'm actually quite flattered and quite surprised by the amount of interest in it. And that's not kind of false modesty. I had no idea how it would do. And I've done quite a number of those talks and book signings and so on, but this is special. To be here in St Andrews, one of my favourite places in the world, and to be standing here in the museum. So thank you for coming. The first thing I should say is, I wrote it myself. I know that will surprise you. I wasn't going to, because I've always felt that I wasn't, and I'm not a journalist, I'm not a writer, I'm a broadcaster, and there is a difference. And most of the TV, radio that I've done over the years has been live, no script, no autocue, none of that stuff. So I never thought of myself as a writer. And then we decided that I'd finally better get some of these stories down in a book. So I went to a great pal of mine, who some of you I'm sure will know, Hugh MacDonald of the Scottish Daily Mail, who's a wonderful sports writer. So I went to Hugh and I said, Hugh, I'm thinking of doing an autobiography. He said, great, so you should, great. I said, will you write it with me? No. And I went, oh, thanks, pal. He said, no, write it yourself, you don't need me. And I said, no, I'm not. He said, write it yourself, do the first couple of chapters, and if they're not any good, send them to me, and if they're not any good, we'll sort it out. So I sent him the first couple of chapters, and thankfully he said, no, you're in the right lines, keep going. So you can decide whether he was right or not, because we've got the books out there tonight. The first thing I should say too is that it's called My Life in Sport, Recorded Highlights, which is slightly misleading, because the first 16 years of my career was as much about music as it was sport. And that's kind of how I got into the business in the first place. Total happy accident. And it's a theme that will recur, how lucky I have been, both at discovering something that I was able to do that I didn't think I was able to do. I had no ambitions ever to become a broadcaster or anything. So I fell into that, and my timing was great. As we all know, whatever business you're in, if your timing's good, that's a huge bonus. So my life in sport, but also my life in the early days in music. And that's how it started, really. And also how I met the man who's written the foreword for me, Billy Connolly. I've met him back in my student days. I was the social sec at Strathclyde University, which involved booking the bands and the discos and all the rest of it. And this was a time when a lot of the big rock bands of the day still played the college and university circuit. So I was booking the bands, and we ran a folk club on a Sunday night. And I booked Billy for the folk club, 40 quid. Wasn't a bad buy, to be fair, even then. And he'd been in a band or a duo called the Humble Bums, which I'm sure many of you remember, with the great Jerry Rafferty. And he and Jerry had split perfectly amicably. And I always remember this Sunday night, you couldn't get the mic out of my hands even then. So I'm a student, and I introduced Billy onto the stage. And he comes on, I'm going to do an impression now, not a very good one. Comes on with a banjo. And he's walking up and down and says, so, here we are, Strathclyde University Union. Where's Rafferty? Number 1 in America. Steelers wheel, stuck in the middle with you. Where am I? Strathclyde University Union. And that was when I first met Billy. Of course, not many months later, he was on Michael Parkinson and became, obviously, the superstar he now is, and still, for me, the funniest man in the world. But we kept in touch over the years, and when the publisher said, look, we need somebody to do a foreword for this book of yours, who are you going to ask? And I said, oh, I could ask Billy. Oh, that'd be great. I think he would do it. So I asked Billy, and then I thought, I better ask more than one, because if Billy says, no, I'm too busy, or I can't do it, I don't want to do it. So I asked a few other kind of pals of mine. I'm name dropping now. I asked Sam Torrance, who I love dearly, my wee comedian pal Andy Cameron, Ali McCoist, of whom you may have heard, and Rona Martin, as was Rona Howie today, who delivered that wonderful gold medal winning curling stone. So I asked the 5 of them if they wouldn't mind doing a little foreword for me and say nice things about me. And they all come back and said yes, which was lovely. So now I've got a problem, because there's a pecking order. I mean, if the 5 of them have said yeah, they're all expecting to write the foreword. Can't all do it. So I don't think anyone minded that we went for Billy, but they're all in there. They've all said some nice things about me, which was great. So anyway, I'm at university. I'm dangerously close to getting a proper job. I was very nearly a lawyer, studying law at university, and doing the social sex stuff. And then one fateful Saturday night, we've got 300 people in the student union ready for what students do on a Saturday night. the Union Disco. And about 6:30, I'm sitting having my first pint of the night with my committee boys, and the phone rings in the Union office. The DJ's had a car accident, he's okay, but he's not going to make it tonight. So we all looked at each other and said, what are we going to do now? Where are we going to get a DJ at 6:30 on a Saturday night? And we all scratched our heads for a while, and then I spoke the 3 words which maybe changed my life. I'll do it. And I did. I was the DJ that night. And I made basically 2 discoveries. One was that I could do it and enjoyed it. And secondly, when you're the DJ, I don't know whether you've realised this, lads, but you don't have to go and chat up girls. An old-fashioned expression, I know. Girls come and talk to you, even if it's only to ask you to play Hi-Ho Silver Lining. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. A couple of hours on a Saturday night playing the records, and after we finished, one of the committee boys paid me that highest of Glaswegian compliments. I know bad. And that was enough encouragement for me to start doing a bit of DJing just for fun, thinking eventually I'm going to become a lawyer. But then Radio Clyde went on the air, the first commercial radio station in Scotland, led by a wonderful man who became my first mentor eventually, a great guy called Andy Park, who was the programming genius behind Radio Clyde. And I sent him in an audition tape, little cassette tape. A couple of weeks later I get the reply, "Why are you sounding like Emperor Roscoe?" Now, some of you will remember Emperor Roscoe. Emperor Roscoe was a Radio 1 DJ, an American, who sounded like it. But I thought that's what DJs had to sound like. I thought I had to sound American. So Andy, in that straight-talking way, said, "Do me another tape and use your own bloody accent this time." So I did a second tape, and eventually I got started in Radio Clyde, doing not only the morning show, 9 till 12, but the rock show on a Friday night. Now, the rock show on a Friday night was great fun. We're on there from midnight till 2. And quite often, if there was a big act playing the Apollo in Glasgow on that Friday night, the record company would twist their arm to come in and do the rock show on Radio Clyde. And it was great. So many of them did, because obviously it was publicity. They were selling albums, whatever it was. So one or two stories from that time. I mean, one in particular, the shortest interview I've ever done. Some of you, I'm sure, will remember a band called Cream. Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, and Ginger Baker. Ginger Baker was the drummer, wild red hair. Cream had split, but Ginger had a band called Ginger Baker's Air Force, and they were playing the Apollo. So he comes in to do the show on the Friday night. So about 12:10, studio door opens, and Ginger is led in. And I'm talking led in, with somebody on each arm. I don't know what he'd been taking, but he'd taken too much. So they bring him in and they sit him down on the table opposite me. I'm driving the desk, and my producer and I are looking at each other thinking, this is going to be interesting. So anyway, I'm delighted to have with us in the rock show tonight one of the great rock drummers, Ginger Baker. Ginger, welcome. And I promise you, I'm not exaggerating, he looked up and he went, "Hey," and then toppled forward and his head hit the table. I promise, we actually played the tape back afterwards. You can hear his head hitting the table. So I'm thinking, so I've made some excuse, but Ginger's maybe not feeling too well. They pick him up and they carry him out the studio. That was the last I saw of him. One word, "Hey." Not the most illuminating interview. Slightly more successful was the night Elton John came in. Again, huge thriller, was then and still am an Elton John fan. So he'd come in to do the rock show. So he comes in and he said, "Dougie, do you mind if we do things a bit differently tonight?" I said, "How do you mean?" He said, "Well, you'll want to talk to him about the album and the tour and all that." I said, "Well, yeah, of course I will." He said, "Well, can we maybe stick that to 15 minutes? And then after that, can I play some records that I want to play and I'll be the DJ?" And I said, yeah. "We'll call it EJ the DJ," he says. "Seriously? Have you got a record library here?" And I said, yeah, one at the end of the corridor. "Give me 5 minutes." Off he goes. Comes back with a pile of albums, 33 RPM albums. One or two of his own, but mainly other artists that he liked and wanted to talk about. So he said, "You drive the desk and I'll talk about the music." I said, "Brilliant." And he was sensational. He was so good. He was articulate and knowledgeable and enthusiastic and all of that. And he was really getting into it, because now and again I would have to give him the signal to go to a commercial break. So off we'd go to the commercial break, and he would come back out the break And it was surreal. I'm sitting listening to Elton John saying, "Welcome back, this is the Dougie Donnelly Rock Show on Radio Clyde with me, Elton John. Now, here's it." I thought, dear me, what a thrill this is. So that was a night I'll always remember, EJ the DJ. Equally exciting for me was Paul McCartney. I was lucky enough eventually to interview 3 of the Beatles. Poor John Lennon I missed out on. But the other 3 at one stage or another I got to interview. But Paul was the most memorable, obviously. He was playing 2 nights at the Apollo with Wings, I think it was at the time. And I'd been to the show on the first night. So I knew that he went on stage at exactly 8 o'clock. So the next night, I've got the interview for 6:30 in his dressing room backstage. So I turn up with my little tape machine, 6:30, 6:15. I'm sitting there all excited. I'm going to get to interview the great Paul McCartney. 6:30, 6:45, 7 o'clock. No, the door has stayed closed, and I'm thinking this is not going to happen. Eventually, about 7:10, the door opens and his manager ushers me in. And again, Paul could not have been nicer. He stands up, and as we're shaking hands, his wife, Linda, who's in the corner, minding her own business, the manager says, "Paul, this is Dougie Donnelly from Radio Clyde." And Linda stands up and says, "Dougie Donnelly, Radio Clyde, we listened to you in the car on the way up through Glasgow to the Mullican Tyre." I'm thinking, Paul McCartney listens to me in the radio. What a buzz that was. So again, we're chatting away, and he was wonderful. He could not have been better. But I know that he's on stage at 8. And by the time we get started, it's 7:15. So I'm thinking this is going to be a shorter interview than we'd hoped. But anyway, he's in great form, and he's chatting away, telling great stories. And I'm keeping half an eye on the watch. It's 7:45. It's 7:50. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to wind this up because I've got Paul McCartney. I'm going to get every last minute out of him. And eventually, it must have been after 7:55, the roadie's making signals. So it's one of those. So, okay, so I thank him. And as I stand up and leave the dressing room, he stands up and he gets that famous Hofner bass guitar that he played. He picks that up, and I'm aware of this behind me as I leave the dressing room. I go out the dressing room along a corridor, and now I'm going up the stairs at the side of the balcony at the Apollo. And as I'm halfway up the stairs, I've only left him 60 seconds before, there's a huge roar. He's on stage, and he's giving it the "Hello Glasgow." And I'm thinking, I don't care who you are, whether you're a sportsman or woman, whether you're a performer, you need 5 minutes before you go on stage just to get your head together, don't you? Not Paul McCartney, obviously. It was a phenomenal experience, and what a thrill. So, as I say, radio DJ, and all the time thinking, this is great fun, but eventually I'm going to have to get a proper job. I'm going to have to go back and become a lawyer, like my dear old dad always wanted. But then, again, life takes a fortunate turn for me because the phone rings, and it's a man I'd met once very briefly called Archie McPherson, the BBC. I said, I didn't really know him, and he said, I hear you're doing a bit of after dinner speaking. And I said, well, yeah, I'm doing a bit, yeah. He said, do you want to earn 50 quid? And I said, yeah, I think I probably do want to earn 50 quid. What do I have to do? And he says, can you do a toast to the lassies at a Burns supper? And I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I went along and did my toast to the lassies and earned 50 quid. More importantly, the fella sitting next to me at the kind of top table was a man whose name I'll never forget, John McNicholas. Sounds Scottish, he was actually an Englishman, worked for the BBC in London, but it was an attachment to the BBC in Scotland for 6 months. And Archie had brought him along to this Burns supper because he'd never seen a Scottish Burns supper before. So John and I are sitting and we're chatting away and everything's fine. And then towards the end of the night he says, Dougie, I know you're on the radio because I hear you in the morning sometimes, but that's all about music and quizzes and all that sort of stuff. But all we've talked about tonight is sport. Football, rugby, golf, you've talked about them all. You're obviously enthusiastic. You seem quite knowledgeable. I think you need to come in and do an audition for me at the BBC. And I went, oh, okay. I think the dinner was the Friday night. I was in at the BBC on the Wednesday, and I was on the other week after doing a match report on Airdrie against Dundee. I'll always remember it. So again, happy accident. If dear old Archie hadn't tempted me with 50 quid, I would not have been at that Burns supper. I'd never have met John. I probably would never have ended up on TV. So again, whatever business any of us are in or have been in, it's about those lucky moments. They call them sliding doors moments now, don't they? That was my moment. So I end up in the BBC, And it was a golden age for Scottish sport. That's how lucky I was in that, because this is very late 70s into the 80s and on into the 90s. And when you think about it, Scotland at that time, Rangers and Celtic were always there, of course, but that was a time when the new firm emerged, Aberdeen and Dundee United, under the great Fergie and Jim McLean, and they were winning the championship. They were reaching European finals. It was a fabulous time for Scottish football. We reached 5 World Cup finals out of 6. Think about that. We've not made one since, but we made 5 out of 6 at that time. We had 2 rugby Grand Slams within 6 years, having not won one since 1925. Stephen Hendry was the world snooker #1. Alan Wells had won the Olympic 100 metres. And of course our golfers were as strong as they ever were. And my ambition had always been to see a Scot winning the Open. I missed out on Sandy, but Sandy was still around. Monty was emerging, Sam Torrance, Ken Brown, so many great Scottish golfers playing in Ryder Cup teams, winning Ryder Cup teams. So all that was happening, and the key for me was that it was all on the BBC. It was all free to air on the BBC. There was no Sky, there was no streaming services. There were only the BBC and ITV, or STV in Scotland. And STV loved football, but they weren't interested in anything else, not really. So the BBC were. So everything that came up, I'm young and keen and enthusiastic and wanting to get into everything that was offered. And they would say to me, what do you know about snooker? I was doing the football, doing some rugby, doing some golf, but what do you know about snooker? No, okay, yeah. There's a tournament in 2 weeks, you better do your homework. Okay, so that was me started in the snooker. And eventually I sort of co-presented it with David Vine from the Crucible, amazingly. And then it was, what do you know about curling? Oh, even less, you better give me 2 weeks for that. So I went on, eventually I commentated on a British Olympic gold medal at the curling. What do you know about indoor bowls? Oh, that's a challenge. That might be 3 weeks. So eventually I became the indoor bowls presenter. And of course, indoor bowls at that stage was almost as popular as snooker on television. We were getting 3 and 4 million audiences for indoor bowls. It was a phenomenon. So I'm keen and enthusiastic and want to do all this sport and get the chance to do it. So again, hugely lucky that things worked out the way they did. And so many memories from that time, obviously. I remember standing in the gantry at the Stade de France, the opening match of the 1998 World Cup, Scotland against Brazil. How good is that? And sometimes, luckily I tend not to get terribly nervous or uptight about things, but some things, some projects, some shows that you do, you're aware that they mean a little bit more. And I remember standing in the Stade de France, packed crowd obviously, opening match of the World Cup, and the countdown in my ear, 5, 4, and I know that we're about to go live to this huge audience back home in Scotland. And thinking, wow, this is quite a big deal. This is Scotland-Brazil in the opening match of the World Cup, and that's an experience that will probably never happen again. We'll never play Brazil in the opening match of a World Cup, almost certainly. We might not get there at all, but and meantime, in the midst of all that, I'm beginning to do some golf. Starting really with the Scottish Open at Gleneagles, which was terrific. And I caught the eye of the network boys that were up to do the Scottish Open, and ended up joining the network team with some wonderful people who became great friends. People like Peter Allis and Alex Hay, obviously, Clive Clark, Mike Hughesdon. That was the BBC team at the time. And the BBC, I think, one of my early years, I think we did 11 tournaments, including 3 of the majors. Last year, and I'm pretty sure this year, the BBC have not shown 1 minute of live golf. How sad is that? Yeah, they show some highlights. They have not shown 1 minute of live golf. And that's to the BBC's great discredit, but also it doesn't help the game, does it? We need the game exposed to youngsters. And it frustrates me enormously that that's the way it's developed at the BBC. But at that time, it was wonderful. Peter Allis always used to refer to me as the eternal juvenile lead. He must have thought I looked young or whatever, but it was great fun. And Peter and I shared a great love of a Scottish comic called Chick Murray. You remember Chick Murray? Chick Murray made me laugh as much as anyone, maybe including Billy Connolly. And Peter was a huge fan as well. So every time I turned up for a tournament, he would always say, any more Chick stories? So I used to spend time speaking to people and trying to find a new Chick Murray story. And Chick was a completely off-the-wall, surreal comic, wasn't he? Chick's the one that said, I came down for breakfast this morning. If the stairs hadn't been there, I'd never have attempted it. You know, that kind of, she opened the door in her nightdress. Funny place to have a door. And Peter thought this was the funniest thing, so did I. And then something happened which I was able to tell Peter, which is amazing when you think about it. We used to do the tea time results programme on the BBC about 5 o'clock-ish, football results. And then there would be a break. We'd go over to the BBC club for a sandwich or a cup of coffee or something, and then back to do Sportscene at 10 o'clock at night. And Chick Murray lived quite near the BBC at that time, lived on his own, quite a sad character. He was getting older. He did his shopping on a Saturday afternoon, and he used to come into the BBC club with his shopping bag, and he'd put it down at the bar, and he'd stand and listen to the boys, how the Rangers do today, all this kind of stuff. And then one night he's in the middle of a story, a Chick story, and we're all absolutely enraptured. And he's telling this story. There's a fly buzzing around and annoying him, just a fly buzzing around. And the barmaid, I can see her now, Marion, she was there for years. Marion, the barmaid, is not paying any attention to these guys on the other side of the bar. She's cleaning glasses and doing what barmaids do. And this fly buzzes around, and then it lands in the bar beside Chick. So Chick, in mid-story, bang, kills the fly. Marion gets a fright of her life. Oh! And Chick says, I'm sorry, was it a pet? Which was just brilliant. I couldn't wait to get down and tell Peter about the fly story. So working with Peter and Alexei and all these guys was just so special. I did so many Open Championships, got to go to the Masters, did a bunch of Masters, got to play the course, incidentally, just to really annoy you. Don't ask me what I scored, but I had 3 of the best 4 putts of my life. So again, pinch me moments. You know, I'm getting paid to be at Augusta interviewing these great players. And I was lucky enough to interview Tiger Woods for the first time, actually, when he won the Masters in '97. Remember when he really made the breakthrough? He won the Masters by 12 shots. And everyone knew that the game of golf was about to change totally. And of course it did. Tiger went on to achieve all the wonderful things that he did. And I'm not for a minute saying that we were friends, but we developed a bit of a relationship, and he was always very kind, always greeted me by name. And I always tried to... Tiger had a great sense of humour, which didn't always emerge when he was being interviewed, because he was such a pro. When the red light came on the camera, Tiger was all business. You didn't get a laugh out of him. And I began to see it as a little bit of a challenge. I wanted to try and get through to Tiger. So there was one Open at Muirfield, really hot Friday afternoon. And he comes back, and we're doing the interview. And when a player comes in to be interviewed on off the back of the 18th, it's not always immediately live, because sometimes the director will say in your ear, I need to see Lee Westwood's drive or Scotty Scheffler's putt or whatever it is. Can you ask Tiger just to wait 60 seconds? And that's quite common, and Tiger was happy to do that. Yeah, no problem. So for that 60 seconds, you're just standing or sitting, talking as a couple of guys would. And I said to him on this hot afternoon, and he's giving it all that, I said, feeling the heat? He said, well, I didn't expect this in Scotland. And I said, well, I tell you, I bet you could murder a beer. Oh, he said, I love a beer, love a beer. This is all off the air. So then I get there, go live with Tiger. So I do the usual interview, and last question, I think I'm going to try and get him here. So I said, Tiger, just a last thought. Around these parts, the boys like to go for a beer on a Friday night. You fancy going for a beer? And just for a minute, there was a little flicker. And then the professional kicks in, and he said, oh, absolutely not. No, I'm going back to the range. I need to work on my swing. I tried and failed. And as he walked out, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, Dougie, I'm really sorry, but can you imagine the headlines if I said on the BBC, I'm just going for a pint with Dougie? So I can understand that, but he was terrific, and it was such a pleasure to interview him and to see the impact that he made on the game that we all love. So many memories of the Open, particularly here on the old course. I was lucky enough to interview both Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus on their final appearance in the Open. Arnold in 1995, Jack 10 years later. So I'm waiting at the 18th green as the great man, Arnold Palmer, last ever Open. And he stopped in the Swilcan Bridge, traditionally, and he turned and waved to this huge, adoring crowd, standing ovation for the great man. So he finishes, holes out, walks off and comes round to be interviewed. And he's quite emotional. Arnold Palmer, as you probably know, was quite an emotional character anyway. He had tears in his eyes. It had obviously got to him. It was an interview that lasted maybe 3 or 4 minutes, quite a long time in television terms. I think I might ask one question, because the one question obviously was, Arnold, can you try and tell us what your experiences of the Open Championship, particularly here at St Andrews, means to you? And he just launched into this wonderful, articulate, emotional description of how much, from first coming in the early 60s when the Open was struggling a little bit, as we know, American players weren't coming, Arnold Palmer almost single-handedly revived interest in the Open. So to sit there and interview him on his last ever appearance was quite an experience. So I always remember he put his hand on his shoulder as he walked past me to go out, and he says, "Thank you, I enjoyed that." And I thought, you enjoyed it? I mean, just what an experience. And then the difference between Palmer and Nicklaus. 10 years later, Jack Nicklaus is exactly the same situation. His last ever Open, stops in the Swilcan Bridge, waves to this huge gallery, who loved Jack just as much as they loved Arnold, goes up. It's a Friday afternoon, and like Arnold 10 years before, he misses the cut. Now, he's not happy at missing the cut. He's Jack. He badly wanted to make the cut in his last Open, but he missed it by a couple of shots. And as he comes off 18, and this is a brilliant piece of planning by the R&A, must be, as he walks off 18 for the final time, Tiger Woods tees off from the first. I mean, it was just perfect timing. And everybody noticed it and thought, wow, this is quite something. So again, Jack comes round, and he's not happy because he's missed the cut. He wanted so badly to miss the cut. So again, I kind of hit him with the same question I'd maybe asked Arnold about how much the Open meant to him, how much St Andrews meant to him. And he was good, he was fine, but without that emotional intensity that Arnold had 10 years before. And then the last question, I said, Jack, I've got to ask you, but you may not have noticed, I'm sure you did, but as you walked off 18, Tiger was teeing off the first. It's hard not to see that as a kind of passing on of the handing over of the baton. He wasn't having it, not interested at all. He looked at me and he said, no, absolutely not. No, I did what I did in my career. Tiger will go on to have a great career himself, but no, nothing at all. I went, okay. And that kind of summed up the Jack Nicklaus personality. He wasn't unfriendly, he wasn't unhappy with the question, but he couldn't see what everyone else saw, that as his time came to an end, that Tiger was picking up. So again, just a privilege to speak to these two great men. And as I say, one of my ambitions had always been to interview the Scot who had just won the Open. Thinking at the time that it might be Sandy again, it might be Monty, it might be Sam, and of course it turned out to be Paul Lawrie. Chippy, who'd had to qualify for that Open in 1999, played absolutely wonderfully in the last day, played just as well in the 4-hole playoff, and he's the Open champion. And again, I'm getting to do the interview on the 18th green. So he's presented with the claret jug and walks over to me. I've got the cameraman behind me. And it's beginning to rain and getting a little bit darker on that Sunday night at Carnoustie. And all I can hear as Paul walks towards me is the PA at the station alongside the 18th green at Carnoustie, and they're getting increasingly desperate. The last train for Glasgow will be leaving in 5 minutes. The last train for Edinburgh will be leaving in 10 minutes. Nobody moved. Everybody wanted to see the Scotsman with a claret jug. And over came Paul, who I knew quite well. And he's quite a laid-back character, even to this day, Chippy as we call him. And I think I might have been more excited than him. You know, he's standing there with a claret jug and I'm babbling, Chippy, you've won the Open, you've won the Open. Aye. That's just the way Paul is, but what an achievement. And as I say, for me, it allowed me to fulfill an ambition a little bit, that I got to interview the Scot that had just won the Open. And how well has he done then and since with the Ryder Cup appearances and all the tournament wins. So these are memories that stay with you your entire life. How lucky I have been to be part of so much wonderful sport. I also got to commentate on 2 Olympic gold medals, which I'm pretty proud of as well, because obviously my sports, football, rugby, golf, snooker, whatever, but they weren't at that time certainly big Olympic sports. So I was not going out there expected to commentate on British Olympic gold medals. I was out there to do modern pentathlon. And wonderfully, in Sydney in 2000, I got a British Olympic gold medal in the modern pentathlon. A superb athlete called Stephanie Cook, born in Ayrshire, moved south. She's now a GP down in the West Country somewhere. And when you I know that you're all steeped in modern pentathlon, you don't need me to tell you about it. But it's, at that time, the events have changed slightly since. It's an unbelievable test of not just athletic ability, but technical ability. You start at 7 in the morning with a round-robin fencing competition. Then you go from fencing to air pistol shooting. Then show jumping on a horse you've never seen before. You're allocated the horse at the start of the competition, and you do the show jumping. Then a swim, and then finally a 4K run. And the 4K run, the final event, you go off in leader order. So the leader goes off first, and then everybody's staggered behind depending on how many points behind they are. So Steph is 49 seconds behind, lying about 7th, going into this 4K run. And the producer comes on to me from BBC headquarters in Sydney and says, Dougie, we'll not be showing the 4K run live. We'll obviously record it and we'll come to you afterwards. And I said, no, Martin Hopkins. I said, Martin, I think you should come live. He said, no, you're just getting excited. We're not coming live. We're going to see Audley Harrison at the boxing. And I went, that's fine. But I had been told by the coach to the modern pentathlon team that Steph Cook was by a long way the best runner in the competition. And the coach said to me, I promise you, if she's anything up to a minute behind going into this final run, she will win gold. And I said, oh, guaranteed? Absolutely. Oh, right, okay. So I said, Martin, I've been told. She's going to win the gold. She's 49 seconds behind. You're getting excited. I said, Martin, come live. I'll get you a gold. You're going to get me a gold? And I said, yes. I mean, how stupid, how brave. Thank you, Steph. She went out and won the gold, which was just magical. Not just on a kind of personal level, but I think I might even have got a pat in the back that night from Martin. But to see a British athlete win an Olympic gold was wonderful. And I thought, well, that's a one-off. And then 2 years later, I did the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. And of course, curling is now an Olympic sport. And we are expected to get a gold medal. So off we go to Salt Lake. And actually that Olympics, it was the guys that were meant to be favourites. They were really fancied to have a good chance. I think they might even have been European champions earlier that year. The girls not so much. And of course, that's the way it always worked. The guys didn't have a good games. The girls started brilliantly, then lost a couple of games they should never have lost. And now we depend on Germany beating Switzerland to allow GB into the playoffs. Fortunately, Germany did us a favour and we're in the playoffs. 2 playoff matches to reach the semi-finals. Rona and the girls that year played 13 matches to reach to win their Olympic gold medal. And somebody pointed out afterwards, in the 100-metre sprint, I know it's not exactly a fair comparison, but the 100-metre sprint, I think they compete 4 times. First round, second round, semi-final, final. Total competition time, less than 40 seconds. The girls competed 13 matches, nearly 3 hours a time, nearly 40 hours of competition. So again, no direct comparison, but it's an interesting difference, isn't it? Anyway, semi-final, we're playing Canada. And that's a bit like playing Brazil at football or the All Blacks at rugby. We're playing Canada, the world's #1 curling nation. So off we go, and we beat the Canadians. Wow, we're in the Olympic final the next night. Guaranteed, gold or silver. And we're all so excited. I go downstairs, interview the girls who are jumping for joy. They can't believe it. They're in the Olympic final. And I go back upstairs to the commentary box. Producer's wrapping up. We're going back to the hotel, no doubt to have a drink. And he says, "You're not going to believe who's just phoned the commentary box." I said, "Who?" And again, a name I'll never forget, Lorraine Hegacy, who was the controller of BBC One in London. And she had been watching and was blown away by curling, and it's getting big audiences. People had really turned on to the curling. And she said, I'm clearing the decks tomorrow night. No casualty or any of that stuff. I'm showing the Olympic final live on BBC One on a Thursday night at 9 o'clock. And a brave decision if you think about it, but that's what channel controllers are there to do, I suppose. So anyway, the Olympic final is live on BBC One, and as I sometimes joke, it got an audience of 5.9 million. I sometimes say 5.8 million, not a clue what they were watching, but it's an Olympic final, it's for a gold medal. So off we go, and amazingly, after, as I say, nearly 40 hours of competition, it comes down to the final stone of the final end of the Olympic final. I mean, you could not have scripted it. Rona settles down to play this final stone. She has to deliver it to about that, and does. We've won the Olympic gold medal. Place is going potty, jumping up and down. But as she's settling down to play this last stone, another of those little thoughts that go through your head in milliseconds, this is a big deal, this, because this is going to be gold or silver in the next 15 seconds. And for years and years to come, every time the Winter Olympics comes round, they'll play this piece of tape with GB winning gold or silver. Your voice is going to be on it. So you better try and say something a wee bit memorable. Don't make an arse of it. So, okay. I don't mean necessarily Kenneth Wolstenholme, you know, they think it's all over, it is now, but just try and say something reasonable. So anyway, Rona plays the shot. Wow, we're Olympic champions, fantastic. What was the phrase that the commentator came up with? She's done it! I thought it captured the moment myself. But again, what a thrill to be involved in 2 British Olympic gold medals. That was pretty special. I'm still working, believe it or not. I left the BBC in 2010. I finished with the European tour just around COVID time, which was always kind of planned anyway. Thinking that was me easing gently into retirement. I'd had a pretty good run. And then my dear friends at the Asian tour got in touch and said, we're upping our act. We've got some money from the Saudis, the PIF. We're going to up the television coverage particularly. Would you like to come and be the lead commentator for our enhanced coverage of the Asian tour? 10 events a year, which is as much as I really wanted to do. And I said, yeah, I'm up for that. I mean, would you like to go to Singapore and Hong Kong and Bangkok and all these exotic places? And I'm now moving into my 3rd year next year. And it's been wonderful. Great people to work with, great golf tournaments and great golf courses. A lot of really, really talented players. A lot of the Live boys come and play. A lot of Australians and New Zealanders. The Koreans are always strong, the Japanese. I mean, it's a great tour, believe me. I know I'm doing a commercial for it here, but it is, and it's hugely enjoyable. I'm off on Monday for 4 weeks in a row. Again, hugely lucky at my great age, still to be working, still to be trusted to do the job. And in some ways, that's one of the things I'm most proud of, is that I don't know how many producers I've worked for over all those years. It must be close to 100, if not more. And the fact that they still continued to use me, and I'm still, to this day, still being employed, is something that I'm quite chuffed about. I'm quite pleased about that. Let me finish with another of those memorable interviews, which wasn't really sporting at all. Some of you, I'm sure, will remember Derek Stark, who played rugby for Scotland, Brian Whittle, Olympic athlete, now an MSP. And Derek and Brian had set up an events company as they were coming towards the end of their playing careers. And somehow they'd managed to get Bill Clinton to agree to come and do 3 shows for them, one in Glasgow, one in Dublin, one at the Royal Albert Hall. And the only condition that Clinton had laid down was that he didn't want a political interviewer. He didn't want to just sit and talk politics all night. He wanted somebody that would be a bit wider than that. So the boys thought of me. He said, fancy interviewing Bill Clinton? I went, yeah, that'd be interesting. So I did. And kind of the last one was the Royal Albert Hall. The third of the three, I'll go back to the Glasgow one in a minute, but the one in the Royal Albert Hall, again, one of those moments where you pinch yourself. I'm thinking, I'm standing backstage at the Royal Albert Hall. There's 2,000 people out there. I'm about to walk on stage and say, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 42nd President of the United States, Bill Clinton. I'm a wee guy from Glasgow. How did that happen? And you just think, wow, how lucky are you? So he comes on, it's now our third night, and we're getting on fine, and he's very, very good. And I'd also said to the guys, has he laid down any other conditions? Is there any no-go areas? Because with Bill Clinton, there's one or two no-go areas. And they said, no, he said he'll answer anything you throw at him. I went, okay. So now I'm thinking, can I really go there? Anyway, it's always important, I think, in long-form interviews to start well, to get a decent first question and try and get your interviewee on side a little bit. So I introduced Bill Clinton. We sit down together on the stage at the Royal Albert Hall, and I say, Mr. President, I think you might find my first question tonight a little embarrassing. You should have heard the sharp intake of breath. What's he going to ask him? I said, how bad was that American Ryder Cup defeat a couple of weeks ago? And he loved it. I mean, he's a golf fan, and we had it was, I think, Woozy's team at the K Club that had stuffed them, and I think it was that era. But it was interesting. The first one that we did was in Glasgow, the Thistle Hotel, and again, a little bit edgy beforehand, but he couldn't have been better. He was great to talk to. But the boys, Derek and Brian, had come up with this great idea: play on music for him. He was a sax player, Clinton, as you probably remember. Played the saxophone. So they went to the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and got 4 young sax players to come along and do his play on music, 4 young women as it happened. So I introduce him, and as he walks onto the stage, these 4 girls are playing the sax. And he loved it. He stops and he watches him and he's applauding them. It was a great moment. So we do the interview. We're walking off together. We're now going through the kitchens at the back of the banqueting hall. And the Secret Service guys are all out, and they're talking into the lapels. Okay, Mr. President, the car's out here, Mr. President, come out. And he's going, no, Mr. President, you don't understand, the car's right here. Get these 4 girls, says Clinton. I want to speak to these 4 sax players. Okay. So they bring up the 4, and they've still got the saxophones with them. And they walk in, they're a little bit overwhelmed at meeting Bill Clinton. And Clinton was, honestly, he was wonderful. The first thing, he said hello to them all, and then he just started talking to them, musician to musician. And he said to one of them, tell me something, do you find that move from G major to C flat really difficult? And they're going, yeah, absolutely. And what about A minor? When you get to it, and they're just talking musician to musician. It was fascinating. And then he would take one of the saxes from one of the girls, and he'd say, I had one just like that. When I was about your age, I had one just like this. Great instrument. And it was only a 4 or 5 minute conversation, but I'm just standing back listening to this and thinking, that's not a bad guy. That's a guy that just wanted to talk musician to musician, as I say. And then eventually he said, thanks, lovely to meet you. Turned around, went off through the kitchens and surrounded by the guys talking into the lapels. And try again. Oh. Well, tell her you'll be home soon. It doesn't go on much longer. And as he walked off, and I always remember one of the 4 girls and I are kind of left standing there, and one of them says, what a nice guy he was. And you know what? He actually was. Whatever your political views, whatever you think of Bill Clinton, that little moment there with the 4 sax players really stays with me. And as I say, walking on stage at the Royal Albert Hall was pretty special. So, how lucky have I been? Never did become a lawyer. It's a bit late now, but I think I've maybe had more fun than I might have done as a lawyer. I've been a very, very lucky guy. Thank you for coming along tonight and listening to the stories. We've got a few books here. If you'd like to buy one for a Christmas present or something, I'll be more than delighted to sign them. But thanks so much for coming. Thank you.